Have you ever noticed something peculiar about people who seem deeply awakened? Those individuals who radiate a certain calm, who seem to see through the illusions that most of us take for granted. There's often something unexpected about them. They're not always the most social creatures. In fact, many of them actively avoid visitors, decline invitations, and seem to prefer their own company to the bustling world of human interaction. This might seem like a contradiction at first. Shouldn't enlightened people want to share their wisdom? Shouldn't they be overflowing with love and eager to connect with everyone? Alan Watts, the philosopher who brought Eastern wisdom to Western audiences, understood this paradox deeply. He spoke often about the nature of consciousness, the illusion of the separate self, and what it truly means to wake up from the dream we call ordinary life. And embedded in his teachings is a truth that many people find uncomfortable. The more awake you become, the less tolerance you have for the games that most of human society plays. Not out of arrogance, not out of superiority, but out of a deep, almost visceral need to protect something precious that has awakened within. Let me take you on a journey into this mystery, a journey that explores why those who have glimpsed the deeper nature of reality often choose solitude over socializing, why silence becomes more attractive than conversation, why an evening alone can feel more nourishing than a room full of people. This isn't about becoming a hermit or rejecting humanity. It's about understanding a fundamental shift that happens in consciousness and why that shift naturally leads to different choices about how we spend our time and energy. Think about the way most people interact. Go to any social gathering, any party, any meeting, and really listen to what's being said. How much of it is genuine? How much of it comes from a deep, authentic place? Alan Watts called so much of human interaction a form of mutual hypnosis. We agree to pretend together. We agree to take seriously things that, upon deeper reflection, are utterly absurd. We discuss our possessions, our achievements, our opinions about people we've never met, events that don't affect us, and futures we imagine but have no control over. There's a game being played, and most people don't even realize they're playing it. It's the game of maintaining the ego. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to reinforce who we think we are. I tell you about my accomplishments and I feel a little more real. You tell me about your struggles, and I offer advice that makes me feel wise. We exchange gossip, and in doing so, we create a shared reality that confirms our judgments and opinions. We complain about the same things, and this creates a bond. We're in it together, suffering together, agreeing that life is hard and people are difficult, and if only things were different, we'd be happy. When someone begins to wake up, spiritually, this entire game becomes transparent. It's like suddenly seeing the strings on the puppets. You can't unsee it, and once you see it, participating in it becomes almost painful. It's not that you judge others for playing the game. You remember playing it yourself. You have compassion for it. But you can no longer pretend that it's real in the way you used to. It's like being an adult who was asked to play with toy cars and make engine noises. You can do it, but something in you knows it's just pretend, and the pretending takes effort. This is the first reason why the spiritually awake often avoid visitors. The energy required to engage in surface level interaction becomes exhausting. It's not the people themselves that are draining, it's the pretending. It's the need to play along with conversations that feel hollow. It's smiling and nodding when someone complains about trivial matters. It's listening to judgments and opinions delivered with absolute certainty when you've come to realize that certainty itself is usually an illusion. It's being around people who are completely identified with their thoughts, their stories, their dramas, when you've discovered that you are not your thoughts, not your story, not your drama. Alan Watts often talked about the difference between the map and the territory. Most people live entirely in the map. They live in concepts, ideas, beliefs, and stories about reality. But reality itself, the actual territory, is something entirely different. It's immediate, it's alive, it's happening right now, before thought labels it and categorizes it and explains it. When you begin to live more in the territory and less in the map, you realize that most conversation happens entirely in the map. People are exchanging symbols and concepts, but very rarely is anyone actually present to what is. Imagine trying to describe the taste of a strawberry to someone who has never tasted one. You could use all sorts of words: sweet, slightly tart, juicy, with a particular texture and aroma. But none of these words are the actual experience of eating a strawberry. The words are the map. The experience is the territory. Now imagine that you've just eaten the most delicious strawberry of your life, and someone wants to spend an hour discussing with you whether strawberries are better than raspberries, referencing articles they've read and opinions they've heard, without ever actually eating a strawberry themselves. This is what social interaction can feel like to someone who has awakened. Everyone's talking about the map, and you're trying to point at the territory, but no one seems interested in looking. There's another dimension to this that's important to understand. When you become more spiritually aware, you become more sensitive to energy. This isn't mystical mumbo jumbo. It's actually quite practical. You begin to notice how different people and environments affect your state of being. Some people, when you're around them, make you feel more alive, more present, more yourself. Others seem to drain something from you. They leave you feeling tired, scattered, or vaguely anxious. You might have noticed this even before any spiritual awakening. We all have. But as you become more conscious, this sensitivity increases dramatically. Most people are walking around in states of resistance, stress, worry, and unconscious anxiety. They're carrying around emotions they've never processed, thoughts they've never examined, and fears they've never faced. All of this creates a kind of energetic turbulence around them. When you're in a relatively peaceful state, stepping into that turbulence is jarring. It's like being in a quiet library and suddenly having someone come in blasting music from a speaker. The contrast is stark, and your system reacts to it. Now, if you're still identified with your own turbulence, you don't notice anyone else's. It's like if you're in a noisy environment, you don't notice when it gets a little noisier. But if you found some quiet, some peace, some stillness within yourself, other people's chaos becomes very apparent. And this isn't about judgment. It's not about thinking you're better than anyone else. It's simply a matter of sensitivity. A musician who has learned to hear subtle differences in pitch will be bothered by an out-of-tune instrument in a way that someone with an untrained ear won't even notice. So when a spiritually awake person says they don't like visitors, what they often mean is that they've become protective of their inner state. They've worked hard to cultivate peace, presence, and awareness. They've learned to quiet the constant chatter of the mind. They've discovered a stillness beneath all the noise, and they know from experience that certain interactions will disturb that stillness. Not permanently, of course, they can return to it. But why voluntarily step into turbulence when you found calm? This brings us to something Alan Watts emphasized throughout his teachings: the importance of solitude, not loneliness. These are not the same thing at all. Loneliness is a painful feeling that arises when we feel disconnected, when we wish we had company but don't. Solitude is a choice, a sacred space that we create intentionally. Loneliness comes from feeling like something is missing. Solitude comes from recognizing that everything is already here within, and that external stimulation isn't necessary for fulfillment. In solitude, something remarkable happens. Without the constant input from others, without the need to respond, react, perform, or maintain a social self, you begin to discover who you actually are beneath all of that. Most people never get to meet themselves because they're never alone long enough. They move from interaction to interaction, from entertainment to entertainment, from distraction to distraction. And in all of that movement, the constant noise, both external and internal, drowns out the quiet voice of their own being. Watts often spoke about the difference between doing and being. Our entire culture is oriented around doing. Achievements, productivity, making things happen, reaching goals, becoming someone. Even our spirituality often gets caught up in this. We try to become enlightened. We work at being present. We do meditation practices to achieve certain states. But true awakening is not about doing anything. It's about stopping. It's about being. And you can't discover being when you're constantly in doing mode, which is what most social interaction requires. When you're with others, you're doing, you're performing the role of friend, host, guest, colleague, family member. You're monitoring what you say, how you say it, how it's received. You're reading social cues, responding appropriately, maintaining the flow of conversation. Even in the most relaxed social situations, there's still a performance happening. And that's fine, that's part of being human, but it's not the space where you discover the deepest truth of what you are. In solitude, you can drop all of that. You don't have to be anything for anyone. You don't have to maintain any image or play any role. You can simply be. And in that simple being, without the constant reinforcement of the social self, something extraordinary happens. The boundaries of who you think you are begin to dissolve. You realize that so much of what you call I is actually just a collection of habits, conditioning, and learned behaviors that you perform for others and for yourself. Strip all that away, and what remains? This is what spiritual seekers throughout history have discovered in caves, monasteries, and hermitages. It's not that there's something magical about isolation. It's that isolation removes the constant reinforcement of the ego. Your sense of self, that feeling of being a separate individual with a personal history and a future trajectory and a particular character, is maintained largely through social interaction. It's in the eyes of others that we see ourselves reflected back. It's in the stories we tell about ourselves that we become real to ourselves. But this self is a construction. Alan Watts called it the skin-encapsulated ego, the sense that you are just this body, separate from everything else, having to defend your territory, gather your resources, and make your way through a hostile world. When you spend enough time in solitude, really diving into it, not just being alone, but being alone with awareness, this construction begins to show its cracks. You start to have direct experiences of consciousness that don't fit into the usual categories of self and other. You might be sitting quietly, and suddenly there's just hearing. Not you hearing something, but just the pure experience of sound arising in consciousness. No hearer, no heard, just hearing happening. Or there's just seeing, colors, shapes, light, all appearing in awareness, but no separate you watching it all. These moments are brief at first, but they're revolutionary. They show you directly that the normal way of experiencing life as a subject relating to objects is not the only way. It's not even the primary way. It's something consciousness has learned to do, a habit it's fallen into. The more you taste this direct, unmediated experience of reality, the less interested you become in the social world where everything reinforces the subject-object split, where every conversation confirms that you are you, separate from me, and we are both separate from them, and we're all separate from the world around us. It's not that this way of relating is wrong, it's useful for practical purposes, but it's no longer satisfying in the way it once was. It's like eating cardboard when you've tasted real food. Now let's address something important. This preference for solitude is often misunderstood as misanthropy. People assume that if you don't want to socialize much, you must dislike people. But this couldn't be further from the truth for someone who is genuinely awakening. In fact, the opposite is often the case. As you see through your own ego, as you recognize the constructed nature of your own sense of self, you begin to see the same in others. You recognize that everyone is struggling with this same basic confusion, this same illusion of separation. And this recognition gives birth to a profound compassion. You don't dislike people. You see through the performance to the being underneath. You recognize that beneath all the personality traits, all the stories, all the defensive behaviors and ego games, there's the same consciousness in everyone, the same awareness looking out through different eyes, the same life force expressing itself in different forms. This recognition dissolves judgment. How can you judge someone when you see that they're doing the best they can with the level of consciousness they have? How can you feel superior when you recognize that you are not fundamentally different from them? But this compassion doesn't necessarily translate into wanting to spend a lot of time in social situations. In fact, it might make you more selective because you can't fake connection anymore. You can't pretend to care about superficial things. You can't engage in the social games of status, comparison, and judgment. So you naturally gravitate toward people who can meet you in a deeper place. People who are interested in authentic connection, not social performance. People who can sit in silence with you without it being awkward. People who don't need you to be anyone other than who you are. These kinds of connections are rare. Most relationships operate on the level of mutual benefit, shared interests, or social convention. We become friends with people because we have things in common, because they're convenient, because we see them regularly. And these relationships can be pleasant and enjoyable, but they often lack depth. They exist on the surface, in the realm of doing rather than being. When you awaken, you hunger for something more. You want to connect soul to soul, consciousness to consciousness, not just personality to personality. This is why many spiritually awake people have few friends, but the friendships they do have are incredibly deep and meaningful. Quality over quantity, They'd rather spend one evening in genuine communion with someone who understands than a week making small talk with acquaintances. This isn't snobbery. It's simply recognizing that time and energy are limited and you want to invest them in what's truly nourishing. There's also a practical aspect to this that Alan Watts understood well. Spiritual awakening is not a destination. It's not like you wake up one day and you're done, permanently enlightened, never to struggle again. That's a fantasy. The reality is that awakening is more like a muscle you have to keep exercising. Consciousness can be clear and present one moment, and then get caught up in identification and confusion the next. The mind is constantly trying to reassert its dominance, to pull you back into habitual patterns of thinking and reacting. Maintaining awareness requires practice. It requires intention. It requires creating conditions that support presence rather than undermine it. And certain social situations simply don't support presence. They support distraction, unconsciousness, and identification with the mind. Imagine trying to maintain a meditative state while attending a loud party where everyone is drinking, gossiping, and caught up in drama. It's possible, of course. Advanced practitioners can remain centered in any environment. But for most people, especially those in the early stages of awakening, the environment matters enormously. This is why monks live in monasteries, why meditation centers exist in quiet, natural settings, why spiritual retreats take place away from the chaos of ordinary life. Not because nature is somehow more spiritual than cities, or because isolation is superior to community, but because certain environments make it easier to remember what you're trying to remember. They support the practice. They reduce the constant pull of the mind toward its habitual patterns. When you choose solitude, you're choosing to create an environment that supports your practice of awareness. You're reducing the variables. You're giving yourself space to notice the subtle movements of consciousness, the arising and passing of thoughts, the play of emotions, the sense of presence itself. All of this is much harder to observe when you're constantly responding to external stimuli, playing social roles, and navigating the complex dynamics of human interaction. Let's go deeper into what happens in that solitude. When you first start spending significant time alone, especially if you're used to being constantly busy and social, it can be uncomfortable. The mind, accustomed to having external input to react to, starts creating its own stimulation. You might notice a barrage of thoughts, worries, plans, memories, fantasies. The mind is like a television that's been left on, constantly churning out content. When you're busy with social interaction, work, and entertainment, you don't notice this as much because your attention is directed outward. But in solitude, it becomes obvious. This is where the real work begins. Not trying to stop the thoughts, that's impossible and misguided, but learning to observe them without getting caught up in them. Recognizing that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not truths, not commands, not you. They're movements in consciousness appearing and disappearing like clouds in the sky. The sky itself, the awareness in which the thoughts appear, is what you are, not the thoughts themselves. This recognition is liberating, but it takes time and practice to stabilize. And it's much easier to work with in solitude than in the middle of a conversation where someone is triggering your thoughts and emotions, activating your defenses and desires, pulling you into their drama. In solitude, you can watch the inner weather without being swept away by it. You can see your own patterns, your own conditioning, your own habitual ways of reacting. And in that seeing, those patterns begin to lose their grip. Alan Watts often used the metaphor of the watercourse way. Water doesn't struggle. It doesn't try to be anything other than what it is. It simply flows, taking the path of least resistance, adapting to whatever container it finds itself in, yet never losing its essential nature. This is the way of someone who has awakened, not fighting against life, not trying to control everything, but flowing with what is, responding spontaneously and appropriately to each moment. But you can't learn to be like water when you're constantly being told by society, by culture, by other people how you should be. The social world is full of shoulds. You should be successful, you should be nice, you should fit in, you should have ambitions, you should care about certain things and not others. All of these shoulds are like dams blocking the natural flow of your being. In solitude, away from all those external voices, you begin to hear your own inner nature. You begin to discover what actually wants to move through you, rather than what you've been told should move through you. This is deeply threatening to the ego, which is why many people avoid real solitude, because the ego is a social construction. It exists only in relation to others. It's made up of all the ideas about who you are that you've gathered from your experiences, from what people have told you, from what society values. In solitude, without constant reinforcement from others, the ego begins to feel uncertain. It doesn't know who to be. And that uncertainty, that groundlessness, can feel like death to the ego, but it's not death, it's liberation. It's the discovery that you don't need to be anyone at all. That being itself is enough. That the pure existence, the simple fact of consciousness being aware, is the most profound thing in the universe. Not what you're conscious of, but the consciousness itself. The awareness that is reading these words right now, that is hearing these sounds, that is experiencing whatever is happening in your immediate environment. That awareness is what you are. Not the body, not the thoughts, not the emotions, not the personality, not the story. The awareness itself. When you rest in that awareness, when you recognize yourself as that rather than as the content that appears in it, everything changes. Problems don't disappear, but they're no longer personal. Emotions still arise, but they don't define you. Thoughts still occur, but they don't control you. Life still happens with all its ups and downs, but you're no longer tossed about by it. You're the ocean, not the waves. And this brings a peace that is independent of circumstances. This peace is what the spiritually awake person is protecting when they limit their social interactions. They've tasted something precious, and they know how easily it can be covered over by the noise and chaos of the world. It's not that they're clinging to it. True peace doesn't need to be defended. But they're wise enough to know that consciousness can temporarily forget itself, can get lost in identification, can be pulled back into the dream of separation. And certain environments and interactions make that forgetting more likely. So they become discerning, or they choose their company carefully, they protect their time and energy, they say no to invitations that they know will leave them feeling depleted. They create boundaries, not out of fear or rejection, but out of wisdom and self-knowledge. They know their own rhythms, their own needs, their own capacity, and they honor those rather than living up to others' expectations. This often puzzles or even offends people who are still operating from a social ego perspective. They take it personally when someone declines their invitation. They interpret selectivity as rejection. They think that someone who wants to be alone must be depressed, antisocial, or somehow deficient. They can't understand that solitude might be a choice, a preference, even a joy. Because for them, being alone is uncomfortable. It brings up all the noise they've been avoiding through constant activity and stimulation. But the spiritually awake person knows that being alone is where they meet themselves, where they remember what they are, where they reconnect with Source. Watts called this Source by many names: the Tao, the ground of being, consciousness, the eternal now, the unified field. The words don't matter. What matters is the direct recognition that you are not separate from the fundamental reality of existence. You are an expression of it, a wave in the ocean, a temporary form that the formless has taken. And you can't maintain that recognition when you're constantly reinforcing the illusion of separation through social interaction that treats everyone as separate egos competing for resources, validation, and attention. You need time and space to marinate in the truth of non-separation, to let it soak into your cells, into your nervous system, into your way of being. This isn't about acquiring new information. It's about unlearning everything you've been taught about who you are. Now, it's important to acknowledge that this path has its challenges. Choosing solitude in a culture that values extroversion and constant connectivity can be lonely at times. Not because you're alone, but because you're often misunderstood. People might think you're aloof, depressed, antisocial, or strange. They might pressure you to be more social, to join in, to participate in activities that you find draining or meaningless. They might take your need for space as a personal rejection. And there's a real danger of spiritual bypassing here, of using spirituality as an excuse to avoid legitimate human connections and responsibilities, of hiding from challenging emotions or difficult relationships under the guise of protecting your peace. This is something to watch for carefully. True spiritual awakening makes you more capable of authentic relationship, not less. More able to handle difficult emotions, not less. More present to life in all its messiness, not more withdrawn from it. The key difference is that a spiritually awake person chooses solitude from a place of fullness, not emptiness. They're not running away from connection. They're simply selective about what kind of connection serves their highest well-being and the well-being of others. They're not avoiding emotions. They're just not interested in drama for drama's sake. They're not rejecting humanity. They're simply recognizing that quality of presence matters more than quantity of interaction. This selectivity extends to all areas of life, not just social interaction. You become selective about what you consume, what you watch, what you read, what you listen to, because you realize that everything you take in affects your state of consciousness. Violent movies, negative news, gossip, complaint-filled conversations, they all leave a residue. They reinforce patterns of thought and emotion that you're trying to transcend. So you become protective of your input, choosing things that support awareness rather than unconsciousness. Some people call this creating a spiritual bubble, and they see it as a problem. They argue that you should be able to maintain your peace no matter what's happening around you. And in principle, they're right. Advanced consciousness can remain undisturbed in any circumstance, but we have to be honest about where we actually are, not where we'd like to be. If you're still working on stabilizing your awareness, if you're still prone to getting pulled into unconscious patterns, then it's wise to create supportive conditions. It's like training for a marathon, and eventually you want to be able to run in any conditions, any weather, any terrain. But when you're first building up your endurance, you choose ideal conditions. You run on flat ground, in good weather, with proper equipment. You don't start by trying to run a mountain trail in a thunderstorm. The same principle applies to consciousness. You build your capacity in supportive conditions, and gradually, as you get stronger, you can handle more challenging environments without losing your center. Alan Watts emphasized the importance of naturalness, of not forcing anything. He warned against making spirituality into another achievement project, another thing the ego can grab onto and use to feel special. The ego is incredibly clever. It can even co-opt awakening itself, turning it into my awakening, my spiritual journey, my superior understanding. This is perhaps the most subtle trap on the spiritual path, using awakening to reinforce separation rather than dissolve it. When someone avoids visitors because they think they're too spiritually advanced for ordinary people, that's ego. When someone uses solitude to feel superior, special, or separate, that's ego. When someone judges others for being caught up in Maya while secretly feeling proud of their own insight, that's ego. True awakening dissolves the sense of being special. It reveals that there's no one to be special, no separate self to achieve anything. What remains is just this, just presence, just being, without anyone doing the being. So the spiritually awake person who genuinely prefers solitude isn't making a statement about others. They're not saying, I'm too good for you. They're simply recognizing their own needs and honoring them. They're saying, I've discovered something precious in silence, and I want to give it space. They're saying, I relate to people more authentically when I'm not depleted. They're saying, I choose depth over breadth, presence over performance, being over doing. And here's something beautiful that often happens. When you stop forcing yourself into social situations that don't serve you, when you stop performing and pretending and trying to meet everyone's expectations, you actually become more available for genuine connection, because you're no longer scattering your energy everywhere. You're no longer saying yes when you mean no. You're no longer showing up half present, wishing you were somewhere else. Instead, when you do choose to spend time with someone, you're fully there. You're bringing your whole self to the interaction. And that quality of presence is so rare, so precious, that it transforms the relationship. People feel it when you're genuinely present with them, when you're not distracted, not performing, not trying to impress or defend or maintain any image, when you're just there, open, listening, seeing them. This is what everyone is truly hungry for, to be seen, to be met, to be recognized, not as a collection of traits and accomplishments, but as consciousness itself. And you can only offer that recognition when you've recognized it in yourself. This is the paradox. The more time you spend alone, discovering your true nature in solitude, the more you have to offer when you do engage with others. Because you're not coming from neediness anymore. You're not looking for others to validate you, complete you, entertain you, or fill some void. You're already whole. So you can meet others in their wholeness or in their forgetting of their wholeness without needing anything from them. This creates a very different quality of relationship. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, no unspoken contracts about what you owe each other. Just two expressions of consciousness recognizing themselves in each other, or at least one expression seeing through the illusion while the other is still caught in it, and that seeing itself is a gift, even if no words are spoken about it, even if the other person has no idea what's happening. There's a transmission that occurs when someone who has awakened spends time with someone who hasn't, not through teaching or preaching, but simply through being. This is why many spiritual teachers throughout history have worked with students individually or in small groups rather than addressing crowds. The teaching that matters most happens in the space between, in the silence, in the quality of presence itself. Words can point to truth, but they can't convey it. Only presence can convey presence. Only silence can communicate what lies beyond words. So when the spiritually awake person chooses solitude, they're not withdrawing from the world in a harmful way. They're actually preparing themselves to be more effective when they do engage. They're sharpening their awareness, deepening their understanding, stabilizing their realization. They're doing the inner work that makes outer action more powerful, more precise, more aligned with truth. Think of it like a musician practicing alone. Hours and hours in solitude, playing scales, working on technique, learning pieces. To an outside observer, this might look like antisocial behavior. Why isn't the musician out playing for people? Why are they alone in a room making sounds no one else hears? But the musician knows that this solitary practice is what makes the performance possible. Without it, there would be nothing of value to share. The same is true for spiritual practice. The time spent in solitude, in meditation, in self-inquiry, in silence, this is what allows you to show up in the world with something real to offer. Not concepts about enlightenment, not secondhand wisdom, but the living reality of awakened presence. And you can't get that from books or teachers or workshops. You can get pointers from those sources, but the actual realization comes from your own direct experience, which requires time and space to unfold. As we come toward a close in this exploration, I want to return to where we started. The question of why the spiritually awake don't like visitors. We've covered a lot of ground, looking at this from many angles. The transparency of social games, the exhaustion of pretending, the sensitivity to energy, the need to protect inner peace, the discovery of being overdoing, the recognition that most interaction reinforces the illusion of separation. All of these are true and important, but perhaps the deepest reason is simply this. When you wake up, you fall in love with existence itself. Not the idea of existence, not the concept, but the actual immediate, undeniable reality of being here, being now, being at all. And this love affair is quiet, intimate, personal in a way that transcends personality. It's the ground of being recognizing itself, consciousness delighting in its own existence, life celebrating life. And when you're in love like that, you want to be with your beloved. You want to spend time together undistracted, undiluted by other concerns. You want to savor every moment, to drink deeply from the well of presence. Visitors, even well-meaning ones, feel like interruptions to this sacred romance. Not because they're bad or wrong, but because they're asking you to shift your attention from the infinite to the finite, from the eternal to the temporal, from being to doing. The spiritually awake person has discovered that they are not separate from existence, that the same consciousness that looks out through their eyes looks out through all eyes, that the same life force that beats their heart beats every heart, that the same intelligence that grew their body from a single cell orchestrates the entire universe. This is not a belief. It's a direct recognition. And once you see it, once you feel it, once you know it in your bones, everything changes. You realize that you've been looking for completion in all the wrong places, in achievements, relationships, experiences, possessions. But the completion you seek is already here, has always been here, could never not be here, because you are it. You are the completion. You are the wholeness you've been seeking, not as a separate self, but as consciousness itself, temporarily wearing the costume of a person. And knowing this, really knowing it, not just intellectually, but viscerally, existentially, you can't help but want to spend time resting in that knowing, marinating in it, letting it dissolve every last vestige of the illusion of separation. This is what the spiritually awake person is doing in their solitude, not escaping life, but diving deeper into it, not avoiding people, but discovering the one consciousness that is all people, not becoming antisocial, but transcending the very categories of social and antisocial by recognizing the unity underneath all apparent diversity. So if you encounter someone who has awakened, someone who seems to prefer their own company, someone who turns down invitations and treasures their solitude, understand that they're not rejecting you. They're not being difficult or antisocial or weird. They're simply being faithful to what they've discovered. They're honoring the deepest truth of their being. They're choosing to invest their limited time and energy in what matters most. And what matters most is staying awake, staying present, staying in touch with the source of all existence. And perhaps in time, if you're interested in what they found, if you're curious about the peace they radiate, if you want to taste what they're tasting, they'll share it with you. Not through words necessarily, though words can help, but through presence itself, through the quality of their being, through the silence between the words, through the space where all boundaries dissolve and only consciousness remains, recognizing itself in infinite forms. This is the invitation that the solitary sage extends, not explicitly, but simply through being what they are. Come and discover this for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Don't make it into another belief system. Go into your own solitude. Sit with your own being. Question your own assumptions about who you are and see what you find. What you'll discover, if you go deep enough, is the same thing that every awakened being throughout history has discovered. That you are not separate, that you are not small, that you are not limited, that underneath the costume of personality, underneath the story of being this particular person with this particular history and these particular problems, you are the vast open awareness in which all experience appears. You are the consciousness that is reading these words right now. Not the thoughts about the words, but the awareness of the thoughts. Not the body, but the awareness of the body. Not the emotions, but the space in which emotions arise and subside. And this awareness is not personal. It's not yours. You don't possess it. You are it. And everyone else is it too, though they might not recognize it yet. This is what dissolves judgment, comparison, and all forms of separation. When you recognize that the same consciousness looks out through every pair of eyes, how can you feel superior to anyone? How can you judge anyone? How can you harm anyone? It would be like your right hand attacking your left hand. This recognition is what turns the preference for solitude from something that could be seen as selfish into something that serves the whole. Because every person who wakes up, who stabilizes their recognition of what they are, who learns to live from presence rather than from ego, they become a beacon. They affect everyone they encounter, not through proselytizing or teaching necessarily, but simply through being awake. Consciousness recognizes itself. When someone who is awake encounters someone who is asleep, something in a sleeping person stirs. It might not be conscious. They might not understand what's happening, but something in them recognizes something in the awakened person and feels drawn to it. This is how awakening spreads, not through belief systems or philosophical arguments, but through transmission, through resonance, through one consciousness recognizing itself in another and saying, yes, I remember, I know this is what I am too. And that recognition is the beginning of their own awakening. So when the spiritually awake person chooses solitude, when they protect their time and energy, when they're selective about their interactions, they're actually serving everyone. They're maintaining the clarity of their own seeing so that they can be a clear mirror for others. They're stabilizing their own awakening so that they can help others awaken. They're doing the inner work that makes outer service possible and effective. And paradoxically, the less they need from others, the more they have to give. The less they're seeking validation, entertainment, or distraction from external sources, the more genuinely present they can be when they do choose to engage. They're not using people to meet their own needs anymore. They're simply meeting people, person to person, consciousness to consciousness, being to being. And that quality of meeting is what everyone is truly hungry for, even if they don't know it. So in the end, the spiritually awake person's preference for solitude is not a rejection of humanity, but an expression of love for it. It's recognizing that the greatest gift they can offer is their own presence, their own clarity, their own awakened awareness, and maintaining that requires time alone, time in silence, time in the wordless recognition of what is. It requires stepping back from the noise and busyness and constant stimulation of the world. Not forever, not permanently, but regularly enough to remember, to reconnect, to return to source. Alan Watts would say, come back to yourself, come back to now, come back to the simple, undeniable reality of being. And you can't do that when you're constantly pulled outward, constantly responding to demands and expectations, constantly performing the role of the social self. You need space, you need silence, you need solitude, not as an escape, but as a return to what you are, what you've always been, what you could never not be. Pure consciousness, aware and alive, playing all the roles, wearing all the masks, but never actually limited by any of them. This is the secret the solitary sage knows. This is why they smile when people think they're missing out on life by being alone so much. They know they're not missing anything. They found everything. And it was never outside themselves to begin with. It was always right here in the simple fact of being aware, of existing, of being conscious. The rest is just decoration, just the play of forms, just the dance of consciousness with itself. Enjoyable, yes. Beautiful, yes. But not necessary for completion, because completion was never missing. It was only overlooked, covered over by all the noise and activity and seeking. So if you find yourself drawn to solitude, if you feel the pull to spend more time alone, to simplify your social life, to protect your time and energy, don't let anyone convince you there's something wrong with you. Listen to that pull, honor it, explore it. It might be the deepest wisdom in you calling you home. not to a place, but to yourself, to the recognition of what you are beyond all the stories, all the roles, all the identities, to the vast, silent, spacious awareness that you have always been and will always be, unchanging in the midst of all change, present in every moment, the very ground and source of all experience. This is what the spiritually awake have discovered in their solitude. This is what they're protecting when they limit their social interactions. This is what they're cultivating when they choose silence over noise, stillness over activity, being over doing, not because they're running away from life, but because they finally found it, and having found it, they want to give it the space and attention it deserves. They want to live from it, express it, embody it, share it, and all of that starts with coming back to it again and again in the solitude where it can be heard most clearly, felt most deeply, known most directly. So perhaps the spiritually awake don't dislike visitors at all. Perhaps they simply love presence more.